Hi class. Welcome to chapter 2. If you can tell by my voice, I'm not feeling that hot today, but luckily I am here at home recording this lecture for you. So I apologize for the voice quality, and I'll do my best to get through it and make it clear for you guys. So this chapter is about guidelines for designing a healthy diet. And there's many things that go in place when designing a healthy diet. What this chapter really is talking about is some of the guidelines that our government has actually set in place to guide us versus personal-based nutrition. And so this is a pretty broad view of how our government recommends we plan diets that are adequate and nutritious. All right. So our government has recommendations, like I just mentioned, and currently the recommendations are called the Dietary Reference Intakes, or the DRIs. And the DRIs are a set of 4 nutrient-based reference values that can be used for planning and assessing diets. And they're established by the National Academy of Sciences and the Institute of Medicine. Within the DRIs are the RDAs, the AIs, the EARs, and the ULs. And we'll be discussing each one in detail on the upcoming slides. Complementary to the DRIs, meaning to accompany the DRIs and to kind of go along with them, are the AMDRs and the EERs, which we'll talk about also coming up. And then there are additional things such as daily values, which are used on nutrient labels. So it is important for you to understand the differences between all of these different recommendations. The first one we're going to talk about is the EAR, or the Estimated Average Requirement. And the EAR is set if there is significant scientific evidence to estimate an average intake requirement. And this average intake requirement is for a specific life stage and a specific gender group. So, for example, infants 0 to 6 months, 7 to 12 months, 1 to 3 years, etc., or adults over 70 years old. And then it would be broken down between male and female. And the EAR will meet the needs of about 50% of the population. That being said, if consuming only the EAR amount, 50% of the population may also experience deficiency. So the EAR is more of a recommendation than a goal, and the EAR helps us to establish the RDAs, or the recommended dietary allowance. The recommended dietary allowance is something we should strive to meet because this will meet the needs of the majority of the healthy population, so 97 to 98%. And again, it's specific for life stage and gender. It's not one recommendation, it's multiple recommendations based on your gender and age. And the goal of the RDA is to prevent deficiency and chronic disease. RDAs are based on evidence established by the EARs, and so they are evidence-based recommendations. A very strong recommendation. AIs, so adequate intake levels, are established when we don't have enough evidence to create an EAR or an RDA. And so if a nutrient has an AI, that is the only recommendation it's going to have. It won't have an EAR or an RDA. If a nutrient has an EAR, we know we can establish an RDA from that EAR. And so adequate intake levels are often based on observations in populations, what populations on average consume, and then if deficiency or inadequacy or toxicity is observed. And so adequate intake levels, we believe they would be about higher than the RDA if we had established an RDA, but we don't. And they should be able to meet the needs of most people because you remember the RDA was for 97 to 98% of the population. Adequate intake levels are based on nutrient needs for a specific life state, for example, normal growth, maintenance of normal levels of nutrients in plasma, etc. And some nutrients that have an AI, or a nutrient that has an AI established, is chromium. UL, or upper limit. So the upper limit is the maximum chronic daily intake level of a nutrient that is unlikely to cause adverse health effects in almost all people in a specific life stage. And so what this means is if you took this maximum amount every day chronically, you would not have any ill outcomes. If you exceeded that upper limit, you may be at risk for some ill outcomes from nutrient toxicity. And for most nutrients, it's based on intake from all sources, meaning food and supplements, but there are some exceptions. Nickel, magnesium, and zinc are exceptions. And the ULs are not meant to be a goal to meet. We don't see too many benefits above the RDAs, so it's not meant for you to exceed the RDA and try to make it to the UL. It's just kind of a cautionary level. This is a chart comparing RDA, AI, and UL, and this is a pretty good chart. I like that there's definitions written here. I have a chart that's potentially even better, but slightly different on the next slide. Here on the bottom, you can see increasing level of intake, and then on the left side, you see percent of healthy population at risk for inadequacy. That would be deficiency. And up here is 100%. If you follow this line down to here, you have a really low percent that are going to be inadequate at that RDA level. Between the RDA and the UL, the risk for inadequacy is very, very low. Above the UL, we now look to the right side, and we have percent of healthy people at risk for toxic adverse effects. And so that would be a toxicity from the nutrient. And below the UL, it's very, very low percentage. But above the UL, there's a very, very high percentage of the population represented by this area under the curve who would be at risk for nutrient toxicities. Okay, this is a second chart that I really like. It doesn't have as many of the extensive definitions like the other one did, but I like this chart because it includes the EAR. And so hopefully that you remember that the EAR is based on research and will meet the needs of about 50% of the population, and the RDA is significantly higher than the EAR. All right, so some components that complement the DRIs, something called EER, or estimated energy requirement. And this is estimated calorie needs for each life stage. So this could mean pregnancy, lactation, childhood, growth, etc. And things that would be taken into account would be height, weight, gender, activity level, and age. And an EER would be calculated on a individual basis. However, there are some broad estimates out there, and they can be found in charts in your book. AMDR, adequate macronutrient distribution range. This is ranges of intakes as far as percentages go for macronutrients. So carbohydrates, fat, protein, etc. And some examples, 45 to 55% of your calories should come from carbohydrates. 20 to 35% of your calories should come from fats. And so the AMDRs are complementary to the DRIs. Daily value. So in case you haven't heard enough abbreviations and recommendations yet, I will throw another one at you. The daily value is a generic standard used on food labels. And the reason for the daily value is that the RDAs, the AIs, the EARs, the ULs, those are based on specific age groups and specific genders. And there's many categories of people who could fall into those classes. And so if we based our nutrient facts label on that, we would have to have like 10 or 12 different versions of the nutrient facts label, possibly more. But that's not very practical for manufacturers to incorporate on their products. And so The daily values represent kind of a generic recommendation that can be applied to any person over 4 years old, regardless of gender. And it does exclude pregnant and lactating women. So pregnant and lactating women are excluded, but this is a general recommendation. You could pick up this box of donuts. Hopefully, maybe you pick something else, but you could pick up this box of donuts, and a general recommendation would be that it's going to meet 18% of your total fat, 15% your saturated, 1% cholesterol, 4% sodium, etc. Often the daily values are higher than the RDAs, and the daily values are based on two additional abbreviations, the RDIs and the DRVs. And the RDIs are the reference daily intakes, and the DRVs, sorry, the DRVs are the daily reference values. Okay, so just explaining the RDIs and the DRVs further. The RDIs are the reference daily intakes. The reference daily intakes are established for vitamins and minerals, things that do have RDAs associated with them. And the RDIs are usually higher than the RDAs. Many experts think that these RDIs should be revised because there's possibility that they're not that accurate. You can see that they're based on relatively old data. DRVs are the daily reference values, and these are based on nutrients that don't necessarily have RDAs. And so there's DRVs for energy nutrients, carbs, protein, and fat, and then cholesterol, sodium, and potassium. So the daily values as seen on packaging are based on both of the RDIs and the DRVs. Okay, moving forward. So how can you determine how nutrient dense a food is? What does that even mean? So nutrient density, and we're going to talk about it more even coming up, but nutrient density is looking at the nutrients in a food compared to the calories in that food. So how many nutrients is a food giving you? And the example here is a soda versus a milk. As far as nutrients go, you could consider protein all the way to iron nutrients. As far as energy goes, or calories go, this is here at the top. So how much protein, vitamin A, C, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, calcium, iron, etc. are in these beverages compared to how many calories they provide you. And just by looking, you can see that the milk obviously has lots of these nutrients. The soda has none of these nutrients. So without doing any math, you could look at these two products and be able to tell that the milk is more nutrient dense than the soda. However, if you're not sure about the exact amount, maybe we're comparing fat-free milk to string cheese or something like that, or fat-free milk to skim milk, or maybe we're just not sure, you can actually use some mathematical calculations to figure out the exact nutrient density. So I have an example here. So again, let's just say that this is milk. So we know that calcium is found in milk. And in this particular glass of milk, there is 500 milligrams of calcium. During the day, we need 1,300 milligrams of calcium. So we're going to divide 500 by 1,300, and what we get is 0.38. In order to convert this to a percentage, we multiply by 100, and we get 38% calcium. So in this milk, we can get 38% of our calcium needs. Now we want to look at calories. So this milk provides 150 calories, and the daily values for the nutrition facts label are 2,000 calories. So we're going to look at how many calories the milk provides compared to how many total we need in a day. And we divide 150 by 2,000, we get 0.075. We multiply by 100 to turn it into a percentage, and we find that this milk will meet 7.5% of our calorie needs. Then we can compare the two. So we know it's going to give us 38% calcium, and it's going to give us 7.5% our calories. So you can actually do a math equation here to find out the ratio of nutrients to calories. And in this particular example, the ratio is 5.1. So I would consider this a pretty nutrient-dense food. The higher the number, the better. The higher the number will indicate that it has more nutrients for less calories. Examples of some nutrient-dense foods. These would be considered healthy foods. So fat-free milk, lean beans, fruits, vegetables, whole grain cereals. And then empty calorie foods, chips, sodas, cookies, candies, etc. Energy versus nutrient density. So we just looked at nutrients specifically. We can also look at calories or energy density. So let's do that. Okay, energy density. So energy density will compare the energy content in the same quantity of food or beverage. So in this example, we're using milk. So we're using 8 ounces of skim milk to 8 ounces of whole milk. The quantity is the same. And in the skim milk, there are going to be less calories per 8 ounces than the whole milk. So the skim milk would be considered low energy dense compared to the whole milk, which would be considered high energy density. Okay. Additional ways to visualize energy density. So energy-dense foods are compact foods that have a lot of calories. They have a lot of calories per their volume. So examples of energy-dense foods are oil, jelly beans. These are both energy-dense. The oil at the top has 400 calories. The jelly beans at the bottom have 100 calories. You can look at the bottom and see foods moving from high energy density to low energy density. And the cherry tomatoes there would be considered low energy density because the volume is so big for 100 calories. Also at the top, you see the stomach that's full of vegetables. That would be a low energy density meal versus the stomach that's full of oil or chicken. So this can be a diet strategy, and sometimes people will choose to consume foods such as these vegetables or these cherry tomatoes or these apples or these grapes because these are going to all fill a really large volume in their stomach, and they're going to make them feel full without having to eat so many calories. When you eat high energy dense foods, they don't take up a lot of room in your stomach. Draw some jelly beans here. And so you don't feel very satiated. You might still be hungry because your stomach is still actually pretty empty. All right, nutrition facts panel. So I mentioned the daily values that are found on the nutrition facts panel. So now let's see the nutrition facts panel. The nutrition facts panel is something that is currently going to change. So what we've known as the nutrition facts panel will be changing, but it's not happening just yet. So I have actually seen some of the newer labels in the stores, but most of them are still the old labels. And on the old labels, they have to list calories from fat, total fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, etc. So we'll compare some of the new versus old labels. This is a current or old label. And this one happens to be from some macaroni and cheese. It has the serving size, it has the servings per container, the calories from fat, total fat, etc. So in this nutrition facts label, you're seeing the amount of nutrition in one serving. And so if you wanted to know how many calories for the whole packet, or how much fat for the whole packet, or how much cholesterol for the whole packet, you would have to be able to do math. And not everybody is going to be able to think that fast or even understand how to do that kind of a calculation. Some of the goal in creating the new nutrition facts label was to reduce the math needed to be done by the consumer and to make it much, much more obvious how much they're actually getting in a container and in a serving. And so there's actually two new nutrition facts labels. The first one is here. The second one is here. The first one is for a product where you would be unlikely to eat the entire container at once. The second nutrition facts panel is for a product where you might eat the entire product at once. So these are generally for products that have 2 to 3 servings. And so this double paneled nutrition facts label will tell you how much is in one serving and how much is in the entire container. So say you get the bag of Doritos from the gas station, like many of us do. What happens if you eat the whole thing of Doritos? Well, you're going to get 440 calories, 13 grams saturated fat, or 13%, 20% saturated, 10% cholesterol, etc. Other things to notice on these new nutrition facts labels: the servings per container. This is really big now. The calories are really big. And daily values are listed in the left-hand column versus the right. And now each nutrient, the actual amount of the nutrient is shown in either grams or milligrams. This was not shown or did not have to be shown before. It was optional. Vitamin D and all of these vitamins, excuse me. Okay, so the vitamins now have the exact amounts of nutrients listed in them. That was not required before. I mentioned that the macronutrients, sodium, cholesterol, in addition to some of the macronutrients, did have the grams and milligrams listed. That was done previously. I think I said it wasn't, but it was done previously. But one thing to notice that's new is this guy right here. So a new addition to the carbohydrates is the added sugar column. And this helps the consumer decide or understand, of all of the carbohydrates in this product, what part came from naturally occurring sugars and fiber versus what part came from added sugars. The vitamins did change a little bit. On the old label, you notice it's vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, and iron. On the new label, we have vitamin D and potassium. So those are just some of the differences. And the daily values did change. 10 nutrients had increased daily values. 17 nutrients had decreased daily values. Choline was added as a nutrient that has daily value. Fiber amounts were increased. Calcium amounts were increased. Potassium amounts were increased. And so when will you be able to see this label? Like I said, some products are already using it. I've found them on my edamame, my ice cream, all sorts of different things. It was originally supposed to come out in July of 2018, but the FDA gave an extension for the entire label so that it does not have to come out until January 1st, 2020. As far as the serving size changes, though, new serving sizes do need to be adopted by July of 2018, and small businesses get 1 year grace period for this. So in the near future, portion size. Portion sizes have significantly changed over the years, and eating foods that are an appropriate portion size can really help control nutrient intakes. And I think some of the nutrients we're concerned about would be fats, sodium, cholesterol, trans fats, added sugars, etc. And then we're also concerned on overall calories eaten during the day. So you can see portions, and these are generally foods that can be bought, prepared, or in restaurants or coffee shops today versus 20 years ago. And I have quite a few of these on my upcoming slides. They're just for information, but I think they're really, really interesting. And I hope that they just kind of open your eyes to which portions you're eating. There is a lot of research done that shows that the larger portion you are served, the more calories you will eat. So, for example, if you are served this hamburger with the fries and the ketchup on the left, you are more likely to eat more of this food than if you are served this smaller portion. And there's also studies done even looking at the size of the plate. If you're served on a larger plate, you're more likely to eat more versus if you're served on a smaller plate. So portions really, really do matter. You can see just looking at the calories and fat alone, not even to mention the sodium. But this is 1,345 calories and 53 grams of fat just for this one meal. That is insane. And this meal isn't outrageous. This is a very typical meal that somebody might get at a burger joint or even a fast food restaurant. So it's just insane how big the portions have gotten. This is an article taken from Nutrition Action magazine, and it's looking at portions on steroids or supersized portions. So these are looking at restaurant portions in popular restaurants. You've got Panera, Five Guys Fries, Einstein Brothers, Olive Garden, Starbucks. But these are all foods that people eat on a very regular basis and even might make at home. Look at this orange juice. Normal serving 110 calories. The serving they sell 340 calories. The fries, almost 1,000 calories for these fries. It's just insane. This is looking at McDonald's, their chocolate shake, McCafe chocolate shake. Maybe you stop at McDonald's and think, oh, I'm getting a coffee drink. What's the big deal? This one pictured has 700 calories. If you get the large one, 850 calories. That's more than what people should be eating sometimes in 2 meals. Outback Steakhouse, serving sizes of meat are hugely exaggerated. Pancake breakfast, pizza, quesadilla. I'm guilty. I love quesadillas, and I love them at places like this. But you have to think about it. There's a ton of calories in this stuff. Even a cookie, 400 calories. And so you can see how this could really add up during the day. That's one of the reasons why cooking at home, maybe sharing meals with people when you go out can be a good strategy. Dietary guidelines for Americans. So dietary guidelines are advice about nutrition, health, physical activity based on scientific research, and the goal of them is to improve the health of Americans. The dietary guidelines are recommended for Americans 2 years of age and older, so they do not apply to infants or children under 2 years old. And they include recommendations for people who are at risk of chronic disease, food insecurity, for obesity prevention, and many, many other things. Some examples of the dietary guidelines for Americans will be discussed coming up. So this is taken directly out of your book, and these are some of the examples for the dietary guidelines for Americans. Some examples of the recommendations are making half your grains whole, consuming less than 300 milligrams cholesterol, increasing physical activity time and reducing time spent in sedentary behaviors, reducing trans fats, eating a variety of vegetables, increasing fruits, all good recommendations. The dietary guidelines recommend foods to increase our consumption of as well as foods to decrease our consumption of. On the top is foods that we need to increase our consumption of because we are not meeting our goals for them. And you can see these are all what I would consider healthy, nutritious foods. On the bottom are foods that we are eating too much of and we need to reduce our consumption of. So the first thing is calories from sofas. What are sofas? Sofas represent solid fats and added sugars. And so these would be things like butter or shortening or beef fat. And then added sugars could be like high fructose corn syrup, things like that. Refined grains are grains that have been milled. We're going to talk about that coming up. But the milling process significantly reduces the nutrient content in grains. Sodium is added to many, many foods in our diet, at restaurants, processed foods. And sodium is unhealthy for us for many reasons, but can significantly contribute to heart disease and high blood pressure. And saturated fat can also contribute to heart disease, high blood pressure, and potentially overweight and obesity. So these would be nutrients that we would want to limit. This is a summary of nutrients we would want to increase. You could see some of those on the table. My plate. So how does our government suggest we meet all these goals? Well, they have created a very cool website that has so many different things to help us do this. And it's choosemyplate.gov. They've also created this picture of the actual plate to go with it. And the plate is meant to represent what a typical meal would look like on a day-to-day basis. Some of the things that can be found at myplate.gov include research, physical activity recommendations, a super tracker diet program where you can actually track your nutrient intake, daily checklists for meals, examples of serving sizes, recipes, all sorts of great things. I think My Plate is a very good resource. However, I think it is a little bit of a limiting resource because in order to access My Plate, a person has to have a computer, they have to have internet, and they have to have time to do this. And so this does not really give access to every single American out there because it's an online version. How did we get to My Plate? So in 1992, we started with this food pyramid, and this is actually what yours truly grew up looking at for recommendations. And the food pyramid was meant to represent which food should be our base, kind of our middle, and our top. And at the very top of the food pyramid, this was meant to be fats and sugars, and we used those sparingly. People decided that the food pyramid wasn't working, wasn't very effective, and so they created this, My Pyramid. I personally don't like My Pyramid at all because instead of having very visual pictures of these foods, we now had these colors. And in order to figure out what these colors meant, you had to go online or read it in a book or do some research on your own. So to me, for the general public, these colors are meaningless. One thing I do like about this My Pyramid is the steps and this person being active because that's very good. But again, My Pyramid did not work so well. So they created My Plate. And I do like My Plate. I think my favorite thing is kind of might be like a mixture between My Plate and this original food pyramid. But I do like My Plate because it's simple. The colors aren't just colors. They have words associated with them. And you can kind of visualize what your actual plate would look like. I don't love that this says dairy. I wish this said maybe dairy or dairy alternative, something like that, because I think if it says dairy, it's excluding certain people who maybe are allergic to dairy, don't tolerate dairy, or don't eat dairy for personal or cultural or religious reasons. But otherwise, I think that the My Plate is pretty good. I don't know how long it will be around. We'll see what our next greatest idea is. Some of the messages from My Plate, you guys can read these on your own, but these very, very closely kind of mimic the recommendations from the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And this is another thing I would note about the My Plate visual. It does say grains on the plate. I wish it would say whole grains, because we're supposed to eat a large percentage of our diet coming from whole grains. This is taken from the myplate.gov website, and you can look at each of the food groups represented by their different colors and see which foods would count as a serving. And so, yeah, that's pretty good. How else can you tell what a serving is? Well, you could actually measure if you had measuring cups or measuring spoons, but not all of us carry measuring spoons and measuring cups with us, when we're eating out at restaurants or everywhere we go. And so there are some kind of visual reminders you can use to estimate food servings. You can use your hand, you can use a deck of cards or a small cell phone, golf ball, dice, tip of the thumb, etc., to estimate some serving sizes. This is an additional slide with serving sizes. This was supposed to be deleted for my online class, but it's not, so just do that. And it is important to be able to estimate serving sizes, because you're going to be doing this for your first diet analysis project. You're actually going to be writing down everything you ate and what the serving size of it is. So you can refer to your book or these slides, or you could actually measure it if that was convenient for you to do. But you can refer to these slides in the book to estimate how much you have eaten during that time. And estimating accurately is pretty important, because it will help us determine how much nutrients you're actually getting and if you're high or low in any categories. Mediterranean diet pyramid. So this is not produced by our government, but there are many, many, many other pyramid type diet schemes out there. There's like a vegan pyramid, a vegetarian pyramid, a pescatarian pyramid, different religious pyramids. This one happens to be from the Mediterranean diet, and the Mediterranean diet is a diet pattern that is associated with lots of health benefits, reduced cardiovascular disease, increased longevity, etc. And you can see what types of foods would be commonly consumed in the Mediterranean diet. Some things that are clearly different from the American recommendations are they have wine, and they have exercise. Our current My Plate doesn't have any exercise visual on it. Looking at nutrition information. So again, as some of your assignments in this class come up, you are going to have to be evaluating nutrition information. And you can find nutrition information really anywhere these days. Magazines, newspapers, online, books, journals, the doctor's office, your friends, your teachers, wherever. It's everywhere. TV shows, it's all over TV. But you really want to learn how to be a good evaluator and kind of sort out the misinformation or the pseudoscience or the weak science from the strong science and the good evidence. And so some of the questions that you would want to ask when you are reading nutrition-related material can help you determine how good a quality that nutrition-related material is. So whatever you're reading, does it agree with the Dietary Guidelines for Americans? What is the source? Is it a doctor, a nurse, a dietitian? Or is it, I don't know, somebody who hasn't gone to college or studied in the profession? What's the educational background of the information? Is it published by an organization like maybe the American Heart Association or the Alzheimer's Association? Or is it published by a commercial organization? Are there extreme claims, lose 10 pounds in 2 days, cures cancer, magic bullet, secret medical breakthrough, no diet or exercise required? Those are all things to be skeptical of. Additional questions to ask. Was research conducted to obtain the nutrition information? So whatever nutrition information you're learning about, how did that nutrition information come about? Did somebody do a study? How big was the study? Was there one person in the study? Were there two people? Were there 500 people? Were there even people? Or did they do a study on fruit flies? These are all things to ask. Were the studies double blind or not? That means that both the researcher and subjects don't know what treatment they're getting. Was the study placebo controlled? There's all sorts of questions to ask to look about study design that are very important. And additional questions are megadoses of supplements prescribed. Are doses exceeding the ULs? That would be something to be very, very cautious about. I'm going to go back to this one for a second. When you do research, I recommend you use the library on campus. You can search library databases to find accurate information. If you search library databases while you're logged into your PolyLearn, you'll be able to access full articles. And generally speaking, those full articles come from legitimate sources. I recommend using a database such as PubMed. If you turn in something to me, I do not recommend that you have used WebMD or Wikipedia or Men's Health or Fitness Magazine. I would like a legitimate source, meaning a textbook or a journal article. Okay, thank you. Okay, last but not least, factors that affect food composition. There are many factors that affect food composition. We're actually going to talk about them all extensively in Chapter 3, which for whatever reason we saved to the end of the quarter, and we will next skip to Chapter 4. But farming conditions, richness of the soil, ripeness of the plants. Are they picked when they're ripe or are they picked before they're ripe? Processing, milling of grains, shipping conditions, are they exposed to light? Are they kept cool? What happens if they're hot? Storage time, are they exposed to oxygen, etc.? And then cooking, are they boiled or steamed or baked or fried or frozen? What's kind of happening to these foods before they end up in your mouth and in your body? Those are all questions to ask. So I hope that this chapter provided you with some basic kind of guidelines to follow when planning a diet. I know it really didn't get into specific ideas for planning individual diets, but it gives you some basic recommendations. And so we will be talking next time. Thank you for listening. I do apologize for my voice. I hope it was manageable to understand. Bye.